The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over the average length of pool equipment. I'm going to focus specifically on your pool pump and motor. I'm often asked how long a pool pump will last, how much it will cost to replace, and things of this nature. I'll also cover other equipment and other podcasts, but in this one I'm going to focus on the cost and longevity of your pool pump and motor. Leslie's Pool Supplies is a proud partner of the Pool Guy Podcast Show. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy and solutions and expertise to do it right. So this, of course, is one of those answers where there are so many variables that you can't really even get a ballpark or even a rule of thumb. So I'm going to go over some different scenarios and you get an idea from these scenarios how long your pool pump and motor will last, depending on the manufacturer, brand, the elements that are out there, things of that nature. Basically, you have to have an idea that everything is going to wear out on your equipment pad. I'm part of an HOA where I have a rental property with a townhome with a pool, and they itemize with a sinking fund the pool equipment, and so every year they put X amount of money towards the pump and motor, filter, heater, and so forth, so that they kind of know the average lifespan of the equipment. And in the case of the pump and motor, typically most HOA associations will give it about a 5 or 6 year lifespan before the pump and motor need to be replaced, which is pretty typical because it's running quite often, 24 hours a day, and this will definitely wear it out quicker. So runtime is a factor. The more you run the pump, of course, the more it's going to wear out, like any other kind of equipment out there. Where the pump is located is also an important factor. So if your pump and motor is sitting out there in the elements all the time, this could definitely cause the lifespan to be a lot shorter. I don't know what changed recently, but back in the day when I first started, almost every motor had a cover on it. So you would have the pump, and then you would have the motor with a plastic cover attached to it. And I think this cover served an important purpose, but I hardly see any pump and motors covered anymore out there. I'm not sure if the manufacturer decided that it wasn't worth having the cover for them. But you may discover, if you do pool service, you'll get back there and you'll see an old pump and motor and you'll see it covered, and you'll see the motor covered, but not very common nowadays in my area. But basically, the elements are a main factor. So a lot of times, your motor sitting out there in the sun, in the heat, will not last nearly as long as a pump and motor in an enclosed equipment area, equipment room. So sitting outside all day long is definitely going to affect the longevity of the motor. And then you can go into the brands of the particular pump and motors. If you buy a really cheap off-brand pump and motor, like if you go to Amazon and buy, like I'm on there right now, I see this Vivo Home 2 horsepower pump and motor for $239, 2 horsepower. So that's really inexpensive for a 2 horsepower pump and motor. How long will it last? I don't know. It's rated for an in-ground or above-ground pool. And so you don't know with these off-brand motors and pumps how long they're going to actually last versus the manufacturer brand, which is Pentair, Hayward, Jandy, and then of course you have some smaller manufacturers like Waterway, and then you have Inyo Pools. They have a line of pumps, and Leslie's has their Jacuzzi brand. And so there's all different pumps and motors out there. A lot of times you're going to find that the motor is made by Century or A.O. Smith, which is a leading manufacturer of motors. For instance, if you buy a variable speed pump from Hayward or Jandy, it's going to have a Century variable speed motor on there. So even though a lot of these off-brand pumps, and Waterway also uses Century, and even though some of these off-brand pumps may not be names that you recognize or very common brands, the actual parts are made by a very reputable company like Century or brands like US Motor. And just note that most of the motors are made in China. I don't think any of these actual motors are made here in America anymore. So that's also a major factor. Back when I first started in the late 80s, early 90s, Pentair was making their motors in Mexico, and the quality control I think was much better. If you have an old Purex pump and motor at your house, or if you do pool service, you'll see an old Purex pump and motor or an old Stay Right pump and motor, and you'll find that these pumps and motors are still running and working fine after 20 plus years out there. And that's because the quality control back in that day was much better than it is today. And that's not a knock against the manufacturer in any way. I think it's just a knock against the consumer, because as a consumer and as a pool service professional, we're always looking for the lowest price, the best price point. And so that caused the manufacturer to shift their manufacturing to a location where they can get lower cost and lower priced items out onto the market. And so you can kind of correlate this with the the shifting of quality and the lifespan of the motors on the back of the pumps and just about every single manufactured brand. Now I'm going to leave variable speed motors off this list because they're different than the standard speed motors. Variable speed motors run differently, and so they last longer. But I'm talking here specifically about single speed pumps basically on the market out there, which is a majority of pumps and motors still out there on the market today. So you're going to find that the quality of the motors have definitely gone down. I was at a pool show 3 or 4 years ago. I was talking to US Seal. These are the manufacturers of the seals for the motors and pumps. And they told me that they really don't see a lot of people replacing seals in between replacing the motor, because back in the day, sometimes the seal would start to leak. You'll see a drip underneath the pump, and that would indicate that the seal was leaking. And then you would take off the motor, put the new seal on, put it back together, everything would be fine. They said they don't see too much of that because after 3 or 4 years, the motor burns out, and they got to put a new seal on when you put a new motor on. So they don't see a lot of sales of seals in between motor changes. So that tells me that the quality of the motors have gone down. And of course, I know from a fact that they don't last nearly as long as they used to. So I don't think whichever brand you purchase from, Pentair, Jandy, Hayward, Waterway, Jacuzzi, any kind of motor or pump you're going to get nowadays is not going to last nearly as long as something that was made back in the day when quality control was really important. The price point wasn't as big of a factor, and so you're going to see that, I would say, a ballpark, if you have your pool pump outside in the elements all the time, if you're in an area like California where you get a decent amount of rain and you get a lot of heat, you figure that that motor on the back of the pump will last maybe 4-5 years at the most, and you got to replace the motor. Now you don't necessarily need to replace the pump. You can replace the motor and keep the same pump. The pump is what they call the wet end. It's in front of the motor. It has a lid on there, and this is plumbed in, and so you don't really have to do any replumbing when you replace the motor. You basically have to take off the old motor, put a new seal in the new motor, and attach it and rewire it. So it's not a really hard thing to do. So you're going to find yourself replacing the motor a lot more often than replacing the pump and these single speed pumps. And so the motors are going to definitely burn out quicker. One thing also to note is that I've seen a lot of starter capacitors and run capacitors go bad on these motors. And so if you turn on your pump and you hear it humming and then it clicks off, it may not be a bad motor. It just may be the run capacitor or start capacitor, depending on which kind of motor you have. It has either of those two. Some have both, but one or the other. And you'll find that the capacitor just doesn't seem to have the lifespan that it used to have on the older versions of these motors. And sometimes the capacitor is burning out because the motor is getting hot because the bearings are wearing out. So that could be a sign that the motor is going bad to begin with. But a lot of times the capacitor just is not good. And so I would start with that. If you turn on your pool equipment and you hear a click or you hear a hum and then a click, it's probably a bad capacitor. They're like $20-25 to change, or to purchase and change. They're pretty easy. They have a couple wires, so anyone can do that. Repair. I would do that first before replacing the motor. But if you do change the capacitor and nothing happens, it's probably a bad motor. You can also check the voltage on the motor. There's other ways to tell, but typically, again, the lifespan of these motors is not going to be extremely long. Now, one caveat to add to all this is that in 2021, in July, there will be a federal mandate to replace all single-speed pump motors, or not, the cell single-speed pump motors. They're not going to come in your backyard and make you replace it, but they're no longer going to allow manufacturers, outlets, to sell single-speed motors above 1 horsepower for the new energy regulations. And so if you do have a single speed pump now and the motor were to burn out after that date in 2021, you definitely are going to have to replace your entire pump and motor, because you won't be able to find that replacement motor anywhere, because there's going to be a pretty steep fine for any outlet selling that particular motor for a pool pump. So anything over 1 horsepower or above will not be allowed to be used in your swimming pool. You can use those. You can use a 3/4 horsepower or less for a water feature and things like that. And you may even be able to get away with running your pool on a 3/4 horsepower pump or motor. It's just a matter of changing the impeller also. So if it does come to that and you still like your single speed pump, you can definitely run a lot of pools on 3/4 horsepower. You're not going to notice a big difference on power. If you have an attached spa or water features, this is not going to work for you. But if you're just running a standard pool, but at that point, I would just urge you to switch over to variable speed pump, because even though it's going to cost you more, just the fact that you're going to save electricity cost on that is enough to make you switch over. And the law exempts a lot of above ground pool pumps, so you wouldn't have to go to the trouble of doing that with your above ground pool pump. However, an in-ground pump, if your motor goes out after next year, you're going to definitely have to get a whole pump and motor. And so basically, right now we're kind of on the threshold of all this happening, and I'm letting you know ahead of time that, this is going to come on the horizon before you know it, and you're going to have to upgrade your pool pump and motor the next time it burns out. So if you are going to replace your standard speed pump and motor with another standard speed pump and motor now, if you're buying a reputable brand single speed pump, let's say you're buying a Hayward Super Pump, which is actually the most popular pump across the country. It's the black wet end with the gold, motor that Hayward makes. It's really popular in the East Coast, and you can find those online for $500 or so, or $550. And then if you are installing them for a customer, the wholesaler, the price is about similar to that, and you would just charge the install fee for that, and it varies by region. And so it's not extremely expensive to replace your single speed pump. You're looking at, $650, $750 for that. But why not just upgrade to a variable speed pump at this point? If it's burning out now and you have a year before the new regulations go into effect, I would say just go ahead and put in a variable speed pump. You can get a Pentair Superflow VS for about $700 and have that installed. And if you're a pool service professional and you're dealing with price-conscious customers, the Pentair Superflow VS is a great variable speed pump. It's 1.5 horsepower. It's nowhere near the power of the larger VS pumps, which are about 3 horsepower now. But 1.5 horsepower is not shabby. It's good for almost all pools. If you have an attached spa, you may want to go with a 3 horsepower VS pump. But I find the power of the Superflow to be perfectly fine. Just note that if you have Pentair automation, it doesn't really communicate with the automated system. Those are designed for the IntelliFlow pumps. So definitely the Superflow pump is a really high quality and good low budget or low price VS pump, and it's definitely something that as a consumer you should look at because of the price point. Plus it's dual voltage, so it's also good for 115 or 230 volts depending on how your pool pump is wired. I'm not sure how it does it. I know Hayward and Jandy also now have dual voltage pumps out there, but I think the Superflow has a really good reputation. It's been around a long time, and really there's very little trouble you're going to have with it, and it's a great upgrade for those that are price conscious, that are going from a single speed pump and they're kind of forced to go to the VS pump. And Jandy and Hayward also make lower priced dual speed pumps. You can check those out also depending on what you like. And of course you can go with the Waterway or the Jacuzzi variable speed pump or any other off-brand VS pump. But again, the Superflow VS has kind of a good track record and a long history, and I find them to be very well made and a great upgrade. And right off the top, variable speed pumps have a much longer lifespan than your standard speed pumps for a number of reasons. I think one of the main reasons is that it's not running at the full 3450 RPMs all the time. So it's kind of like a car. If you have a car and you're driving it and you're going 90 miles an hour all day long on it, that engine is not going to last very long. Versus a car where you're driving it at 35 miles an hour and then 55 miles an hour all day long, it's going to definitely extend the lifespan of that motor. So that's one reason why VS pumps last a lot longer than a standard pump. There's some other factors also that give it longevity. The only thing you have to be concerned about when you purchase a variable speed pump is the driver. Now the driver is basically that controller that sits on the back of the VS pump, and this is kind of what controls the variable speed pump, kind of the brain of it. And these drivers will actually go out much sooner than the actual motor, which is kind of ironic. So these motors and pumps on the VS pumps will last much longer than the control panel or controller or driver of these VS pumps. And so before you buy a VS pump, kind of research different brands. If you have a Hayward VS pump, you know that for the last, up until 2020 or 2019, any pump prior to that, they had a run of some really bad drivers or drives on their pumps, I should say. And these drives didn't last very long. You would get an error message, and basically you'd have to get a whole new drive for the pump, which is not cheap. They're pretty expensive. I think the IntelliFlow one is like $600, so they're definitely not a cheap part on the variable speed pump. Sometimes it's even better just to get a whole new pump and motor because the drive is so expensive. So basically, you have to do your research, and Hayward definitely has improved their VS pumps. They have a brand new system, and they offer, I think, a 4-year warranty now on their VS pumps to kind of reassure the consumer based on their past bad track record with their drives going out on their pumps. So definitely, I think one factor to look at is the longevity of the VS pump based on the drive or the part that runs the VS pump. And so that's the part you have to be concerned about. On the IntelliFlow, sometimes the water seal will definitely go bad, so make sure you cover that control panel all the time. Never leave that thing open, always keep it closed. When you clean a filter next to an IntelliFlow pump, make sure you cover. If the pump is right next to where the filter lid is and the water's going to spill out on it, make sure you cover that really good. Even with the lid closed, I would cover that really well, because that large amount of water going onto it could actually break the seal of that VS pump. And so again, most of them are water sealed really well out there, but you kind of figure that there's a electronic controller out there in the elements. And again, I go back to the beginning where I talked about outdoors versus indoor. Then you have this pretty high-tech piece of electronic equipment sitting on the back of the pump, and it's getting hit by water all the time. So kind of make sure that the covers are closed on these things. The last thing you want to do is leave the cover open when it's raining or when you have a lot of moisture in the air, because that is an important part of the variable speed pump. And so just for the fun of it, I looked up the SuperFlow VS drive, and then I looked up the SuperFlow VS pump, the whole pump with the motor and the drive on back. And so for $700 right now, you can get the whole pump, motor, and drive brand new. And then if the drive were to go out, you would get the little control panel, and it's listed for $630. So pretty crazy that the drive is so expensive, but that's basically the brain and the heart of the VS pump. Without that, it's not going to start or run. So I don't know why manufacturers charge so much for it, but that's just how it is. And so sometimes, like in this case, I would just buy a whole new SuperFlow VS if the drive were to go out. And so that's probably the only downside. The only downside that I can say about a variable speed pump is that when the drive goes out, you basically are going to need a new pump in that case, which kind of is the Achilles heel of a variable speed pump, because it's not a part that you can easily change out at a low cost and keep the pump running. And I think the manufacturers, I don't want to be too much of a conspiracy theorist here, but I think just like with cars, they make it very complicated now to change out parts, because the money is not in the fact, because these cars last a long time now, and so they have to make their money somehow. And so with these VS pumps also, since you don't have to replace them as often, you could put one in and it could go for 10 or 15 years. And the way the manufacturer can kind of spur you to get a new one is to make the drive so expensive you have to buy a whole new pump. Now, just chalk that up as a Mel Gibson conspiracy theorist thing at that moment, and it's not me talking, it's some conspiracy theorist talking. But of course, in no way would I let that stop me or anyone from getting a variable speed pump. I have 2 of them at my house. I have a water feature running off of one, and I have my main pool pump running off of it, mainly because of the exceptional savings on your energy. And so you're going to see a dramatic drop in your electricity bill. Just as a quick example, in my house, I'm running my VS pump at 1800 RPMs for 8 hours a day, and then I'm running it at 2300 RPMs for another 5 hours. Those 2 times combined is a lot of hours, but combined it's about running my old 1.5 horsepower whisper flow pump for about 2 hours a day. So basically my energy use has been cut in half or more by using the variable speed pump at a lower speed. I never run my pump higher than a medium speed because of the energy usage. You don't really need to. At 2300 RPMs, the water is flowing really nicely in the pool and you're saving a ton of electricity. So the energy savings are a big factor. And if you have to replace your VS pump after 7 or 8 years, the money you save on electricity will definitely pay for a new one. And definitely the variable speed pumps are extremely reliable. I mentioned the drive because that's one of the main parts that will go out. But other than that, you can get 10, 15 years out of your variable speed pump, no problem. I have some original Pentair and Teleflow pumps on my route still. I have one that was actually given to a builder as a demo and is still running fine after 15 years. So these pumps are definitely made to last a very long time, and they're very durable and long lasting, and they're not running at full speed, so they're going to have definitely a long lifespan. So you can get a 3 horsepower VS pump for about $1,200, and then you have to get it installed. Definitely worth it to get that, and you can buy the lower end ones like the Superflow. Hayward has the Maxi Flow VS. I see it on sale here for under $680 also, and so you can really get a deal on these things and just have it professionally installed. A lot of times if you buy one of these things and don't have it professionally installed, the manufacturer will not honor the warranty, and that's probably a whole nother podcast there, but you have to have it professionally installed. Otherwise the warranty is only 30 days on most of the stuff you buy on the internet now, and so you definitely want to check with that when you buy a VS pump. What is the warranty on it, and can you install it yourself, or do you have to hire a professional to install it to get the warranty? So I threw that out there so you kind of know that there is that caveat also, that a lot of manufacturers are not going to honor the warranty if it's not professionally installed. So to back up, if you have a single speed pump and motor, chances are you're going to have the pump last longer than the motor. The motor's going to last maybe 4 to 5 years out there. You may have to change the capacitor before the motor. In some cases now I've noticed that to be very common out there, where the capacitor doesn't last as long as the motor, and then of course the motor will have to be changed. And then you have the new regulations coming in 2021 in the summer saying you have to get a variable speed pump if you are going to replace a single speed motor above 1 horsepower or greater. And so keep that in mind. And so if you do have a pump that's about 3 or 4 years old, you definitely want to be saving up some money to replace that with the VS pump after that law kicks in summer of 2021. Definitely you want to make sure you have the funds for that, because that's happening, and it's going to be one of those things where you won't be able to find a 1 horsepower pump anywhere, because all the retailers and distributors are going to be fined heavily for selling them. And so keep that in mind right now as far as longevity. If you just put in a single speed pump, you're going to have a good 3 or 4 years still left. No worries there. But I would definitely start looking for a variable speed pump upgrade on the horizon as soon as you can, and kind of get an idea of which pump you want and which installer you want to put in there, either your local pool store, Leslie's Pool Supply, or your local pool service provider. I definitely recommend having it professionally installed. That way you get that warranty from the manufacturer, and the warranty is important in case you have problems. Like I mentioned with the Hayward, with the bad drives, with that 4-year warranty, you can rest assured that that Hayward VS pump is going to be fine going forward. But you definitely want that warranty on these VS pumps. And if you're looking for more resources for your pool care, definitely check out my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. I have an ebook available for $9.99, plus a lot of helpful web pages there. And if you're in the industry and you want to enhance your business, definitely check out my coaching program at poolguidecoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Leslie's Pool Supplies has been do-it-yourselfers and pool trade professionals' trusted partner since 1963, providing quality products and services to make pool care easy, and solutions and expertise to do it right.